a review of the Finibo USB-C charger which has 300 watts. So in total we have a couple of different ports on here. Many of them are USB-C and many of them are USB-A. So now if I unplug the three USB-A ports, then we can see that a couple of them are actually what one used to call quick charge, but I don't know if they are quick charge any longer, and I also don't know if they have the certification. Oh, actually they don't have the certification, and also they are just green. So there used to be this quick charging certification, which I think went up to 2.1 watts per port, maybe also 3 watts eventually with quick charge 3, but I'm unsure about this. So now in the last couple of years I wondered for quite some time how other people do solve this problem, which is how do you charge your devices if you're traveling. So usually you have just one charging port, which might be in the middle of a train, and then you need a 3-meter extension cord just to get into this charging port. And sometimes you are maybe in the middle of a coffee shop and then you need to charge your notebook, but also your camera, and also the 2 camera batteries, and also your power battery, and also your camera, phone case, which also happens to be a battery bank, because you need all of these devices to be charged to function at least normally for basically a day. And maybe you also have a notebook, power battery, and so on and so forth. How could you all do this with just one charger is a question I asked myself many times again and again. So in the last couple of years I tried a couple of these chargers. Some blew up, so one actually began to smell very weirdly and also become hot, and then it actually kind of melted inside, which retrospectively might not have been the best idea in terms of attaching it with a cable to my notebook. I think it in the long term kind of this actually got the battery. So the battery I had to eventually replace them, but I also had issues with the battery on my first notebook. Nonetheless, I again bought a charger which is not a branded charger, so there would be a couple of brands which now are established. One of them would be Anchor. There are also a couple of other ones. Ugreen, for example, seems to appear on Amazon again and again. This is not this. This is probably just a charger which is produced in or made and created in China, and then somebody buys this charger and then rebrands it and sells it on Amazon as Finibo charger. Maybe it's also Chinese companies themselves who are now selling this on Amazon, at least where I got it from. So now this charger comes with in total 300 watts power output, and this is quite useful, I think. So 2 of these ports are actually 100 watts, and so one can now charge power delivery. So these are the ones that are actually now basically, well, orange, and one can charge up to 100 watts. So both, I think, have 100 watts, but they also have the circle around them. So sometimes there is the circle around them and it just in total says 100 watts, but this circle probably says that each of them has 100 watts. So now I did actually additionally get all of these USB cables, because these USB and USB-C cables were not attached to this charger. I also additionally got this cord, which is basically an angle cord or angular cord, or I don't know what it is exactly called. But what this allows me to do is the following. So usually if one has the charger somewhere, let's just say in a pocket, then one has the problem that the cords go out on one side and the other cord goes out the other side. So one has to place basically this charger in a way that both cords are not, that there is not too much pressure basically on the ends of these cords, or cables. But if I now have an angled cable, then what I can do is I can wrap it around like this, and then also have the charging cable basically go into the same direction as this. Now, since I live in Germany, particularly also not, I wanted to say Europe, particularly Germany, so I got it the wrong way round, what I can also use is this very small charger, which to my knowledge does not have this additional pin, which sometimes seems to be the grounding pin, but I'm not entirely sure about this. Well, maybe I should polish up my knowledge about this. So this charging pin now allows you to basically have this very flat charger. And again, it is angled, which I find more useful. So there are also cables that basically have only the angular design on one end, but I decided to go for this that is on 2 ends. Now also with the length of this charging cord, there have been quite a few iterations of myself going through this. And this is basically the final thing. This is kind of the best charger I ever had, and it also only cost in total 48 euros, at least if I believe the listing that it currently is listed on Amazon. I don't know if I actually bought it for this price, or maybe it was a little bit cheaper or more expensive. But some of these chargers actually sell for like 250 euros or something like this from Anchor. Some of the newer versions are also called GAN, which I don't know exactly what it stands for. But now, what I have been using in the past is basically USB-A as the standardized charging port for all devices. The problem now is that there does not sell basically a charger, which also would be reasonably priced, which then would have maybe 2 USB-Cs, because I at least need 1 USB-C for charging my notebook. So for those of you who don't know, power delivery is kind of a protocol, and USB-C happens to be the form factor the power delivery protocol is often housed in. Now my notebook, my HP Spectra 15 360, can charge, I don't know with how many watts through power delivery, but the 100 watts it at least seems to take. I think the barrel plug original charger has maybe 120 watts or something like this. Maybe it's also 150. Now, there has been this idea, which has been circling around basically YouTube online reviews for now a couple of years. What if you just had one cable? Then you could plug in one cable to rule it all. And so you would have this one cable, this would be connected to your PC, and then you could have your PC, you carry it basically to your desktop station, and then your PC would basically power your entire desktop station. Now this dream has not turned into a reality for me, even though I purchased a notebook like this already a couple of years ago in 2019, and now it's 2024. So why has this dream not turned into a reality? Mostly for me, it has been, so there are for me, there have been a couple of problems. So to understand this problem, we need to take a look at the 2 different hubs that are available. The first one is the USB-C hub that is kind of just powered by the notebook, and the second one is what one could call maybe an external hub, which then also would happen to have basically not only power delivery through the USB-C cable, but also these other protocols which are called Thunderbolt. So Thunderbolt now has a kind of a higher data put-through rate, but this idea was that you could basically have a hub which also would have connected power, and it would also transmit basically data as well as power to the notebook. But till now I never purchased one of these very expensive hubs, meaning that I still have a USB-A hub because all of the other things did not really work out. Now back to the charger. How does this now fit into this? If you had a hub which connected via USB, then you would also need, in order to pass through charge, which many of these kind of do, you would also need a 100 watt USB-C charger, or at least 60 watts or 70 watts. Now, in terms of what actually charges my notebook, if my notebook, which is a 15-inch, as I already mentioned, HP Spectra 360, if this is off, then with the old USB-A, which went up to 3 watts in total. So there have been different standards, quick charge 1, 2, 3, maybe also 4, and the highest of them charged with, I think then, in total, oh, I said actually the watts, but it's not the watts, so the highest of them charged with, I think, 18 watts, so I got it wrong previously. But the amps that go through basically go up to 3, and previously there have been 2.1 and 2.5 if I remember correctly, and these would then be branded also orange. Now this is a standard that also would have to be licensed, and so some of these chargers just did not care and did not basically purchase the pricey licensing for the quick charge, and thus they just had maybe up to 2.1, or also maybe had a similar charging protocol which would be similar to this, but then again did not have as much power, or sometimes it did, and I don't know. Now currently I have this here, and again this now allows me to charge basically my notebook as well as power banks with kind of the maximum power I could have, and this now has 3 USB-A ports. Now the problem, at least initially I thought, was that with these 3 USB-A ports I am not able to charge all of my devices because most of my cables are still USB-A. So what I purchased in the last couple of years are a couple of adapters that adapt from USB-A to then USB-C, which would allow me to also use basically newer USB-C cables that look like this, and to then also plug them into this. The problem now is if you have a adapter here and you plug it in here, then this already is, so it adds basically fragility to the system, because currently it is one cable. If I add an adapter, then the adapter could malfunction, the connection between the adapter and the cable could malfunction, or basically the plugged-in adapter plus cable into this could also malfunction. So there basically are more points at which errors could occur. Now luckily, in the last couple of months actually, I actually got 2 devices which now also happen to have chargers which also are only USB-A on the other side. And these two devices are a Galaxy Watch 6, which now also came with a USB-C cable on the other side, which is this one. And then I also have another one, which I think is the Garmin cable. So I purchased recently, or last year, a Garmin Fenix 7S Pro, which also only came with a USB-C connection, which now means initially I figured I only need 2 USB-C ports because I wanted the USB-A ports. But now, because I have at least these 2 cables, I can basically have 4 USB-C cables connected to this. So one is at least for my notebook, the second one maybe for my phone, maybe for a power bank, because power banks often also charge with at least 18 watts. And so, or maybe sometimes with 30 watts input, I at least have one that is 10,000 milliamp hours, and it charges, I think, with 30 or 60 watts or something like this. And it also outputs 30 watts, which, now coming back to the notebook, my notebook used to charge with 18 watts, which was the maximum power output from quick charge, and the maximum power output from quick charge would charge my notebook only over a very long period of time if it is turned off, if it was turned off. So this would maybe take, I don't know, 20 hours, 18 hours, and then it would eventually charge up with 18 watts. Meaning, so there, to my knowledge, are basically no USB-A connections, so basically no cables or no chargers which have a USB-A connection on the one side, and it would output more than 18 watts on the other side. Meaning, if I want to charge my notebook with a charger like this, I need at least some USB-C cable, and ideally also a charger that supplies the USB-C cable with enough power, which is then usually transmitted via the power delivery protocol. So now, now what I have is basically this charger, and this charger has 2 cables, which I just mentioned I can use. Now, in terms of using this, there are a couple of other things I want to mention. First of all, I recently basically traveled a little bit via train. And in some trains, at least in Germany, you have a battery, not a battery, but a socket, a plug. And in the last journey, I had one. So basically, I had 3 trains, and one of them had a charger, which meant that I needed all the charging time in order to charge my 2 watches, in order to charge my phone, and also maybe potentially my notebook. But I didn't use the notebook, so I needed at least to be plugged in all the time in this one train as soon as I arrived there. Now, there are a couple of complications if you have this charged. Basically, if you have your devices charged, then they are connected to the charger. If you have your charger connected to this, and then there is somebody who wants to move in, or you actually don't have the seat which is close to the socket, then it's this charging connection problem, because there is this wire going over you, which is a problem. So often I charge only basically if I'm right next to the socket. But what I also, because I did a little bit of traveling around Europe in the last couple of years, mostly a few years ago. And for this I already brought a camera. But if I now bring a camera, I need to additionally charge at least the batteries. And maybe also something else, and maybe also something else, and maybe also something else. So usually I had at least 2 power banks, then I have my phone, then I have at least 2 to 4 batteries for my camera, which now I have a dual charger for, because with one charger, if you happen to be in a hostel, let's say, and you want to charge it overnight, then you need to either stand up to change the battery, because otherwise the batteries won't be charged in the morning, or you need at least one charger that charges at least 2 batteries, and then the batteries last throughout the day. But on my newer Canon EOS M50 they don't. So that also has been a problem, because how would I otherwise then charge these devices? I would maybe have to bring 2 chargers for the batteries for the camera, because then they would be at least sufficient for 1 day of camera shooting and taking pictures. Now back to using this in the train. If I now plug this in, this now only is 1 meter. Why is it only 1 meter? The problem is that I could basically choose the length. I can choose the length of this cable. Now, if this is longer, then the whole thing gets heavier. And the standard cable length seems to be 1 meter. And so if I have a standard cable that is 1 meter, I can basically wrap all of these kind of together, even though some cables, like the Garmin connection, like the Garmin charger, is shorter, and also the plug for my Galaxy Watch is also shorter, which is here. Now, if I now want to put this into a bag, because I now also have this wrapped around the side, what I can do is wrap it around the side, ideally where the cable is not coming from, and just wrap it around like this. And I also have these rubber bands, which are I think 20 centimeters or something like this, which I also got from Amazon, which also I think makes the whole package look somewhat not ridiculous, and somewhat professional even maybe. and then I can have it like this. And then what I have been doing is I have been trying a couple of different variants of this. The first variant is that in my rucksack, I put it in basically the top bag or pocket. What this results in is that I arrive at a seat, and then I put my bag usually down in front of me, mostly because it contains many things I don't want to get stolen, and so I often put it in front of me, even though in terms of leg room that's slightly suboptimal. But what this also means, now I have this pocket kind of accessible. If I have this pocket accessible and I also want to charge my devices, now what I have been doing is, because now this is kind of going only, the cables only go into one direction, which means I can take this and put it in like this. If I have it in like this, I now can basically sit down and then grab the charging one and plug it in, and then often there are these plates in front of one, and then I can grab these and basically charge my devices on top of this small plate on the table, which is, I think, fairly useful. Now what I also can do is, once I am done charging, I can basically take all of these cables and wrap them like this, or basically wrap them up like this, or whatever it is called, and then put them back into this. Now this pocket is a little bit too small for this, and also it's not the best rucksack I ever owned, because it already begins to deform. Now what I also have in here usually is a power bank, which then I also can charge. Ideally, maybe I would be able to get my watches, for example, and attach them to here, and then put it actually in this, such that they would be tucked away, but this is not really possible because I also have this pocket on the outside, which is kind of my toiletry bag on the outside, which also needs to be accessible. So what I have been doing is I have been using it like this, and this seems to be working quite well. The other option is that I have it in my notebook bag, such that I can take out my notebook bag, and then I have my notebook bag maybe on top, and I put the notebook on top, and then I have this somewhere in there. But the situation in which I have it basically on top of the rucksack seems to be the best. Now, one addition. The one addition is, what if I need to charge? Let's say I'm in a hostel and there is a charging plug, and I don't want all of my devices to be like 5 meters away from me in a room with 8 people, and then my notebook be gone, that my notebook is gone in the morning. This is a situation I want to ideally avoid. So now I have been thinking about this length of this cable. And I also have now a 3-meter cable of this. The problem is just that then the whole thing gets too heavy. So what I have now additionally in my rucksack usually, or in my notebook bag, which then is housed in my rucksack, is an extension cord, which is 2 meters. Now the 2-meter extension cord allows me then just enough to have in total then 3 meters, which seems to be about the size I want to carry with me. I could also have opted for the 4 meters or 5 meters, but then again, it just becomes more weight in terms of the cable, because the cables are on the inside copper, as far as I know, and so it weighs quite a bit. And since this is already quite a puck, not a plug, this then becomes too heavy. So I have this extension cord, I have it in case I need it, but if I just am sitting down with my rucksack, I can plug this in, and I don't have basically the additional cable that I also would need to basically store away every single time. And so with the 1 meter cable, this is also about the length of the other cables, and this is basically in terms of the extension cord, the story of the additional extension cord. Now what I also have in terms of, you might have asked yourself, what about USB-C and micro USB and so on and so forth. So the 2 cables that are power delivery with 100 watts, they have to be USB-C on both sides, because otherwise the adapters also need to be graded to power delivery, which in terms of micro USB or in terms of USB-A is not really possible to the extent of my knowledge. Now, what I have been getting additionally is to still be able to connect to the Anywhere 2S, for example, which I recently got, which now again has micro USB, because I didn't get the newer one, because the newer one had some features, or rather lacked some features, and also was more expensive compared to the older one. So what I need to still have is micro USB. And now I do have these adapters, but the adapters again are not properly rated, which means if I charge my phone with USB-C through these adapters, then my phone charges very slowly, and also my notebook would charge very slowly. Nonetheless, these adapters are also quite expensive, and so as the cables, I also had to buy all of these cables, and I already now have them standardized and not just did get a random collection of cables, such that it actually looks somewhat nice and professional, and also that I kind of know that these cables are at least graded to maybe 3 milliamps in terms of the power output. Is it milliamps, or I think it's amperes, not milliamps. Yes, the milliamps are just for basically the capacity for power banks, for example. So in total, I now have these. I maybe should replace them, but I also found it very difficult to find adapters on Amazon that actually they're now graded to at least 18 watts, which would be the Quick Charge 3 standard, such that they actually would charge my phone also, basically with... So I think now we can also actually see this on there, what the USB-A have. So the USB-C 1 and 2, they both have 100 watts, and they both have 5 watts and 3 amps, so there are different combinations basically. One of these is 5 volts and 3 amps. There is also a couple of other, like 20 volts and 5 amps, which then would result in 100 watts in total. And then we also have the second and the third USB-C output, and then we also have a USB-A 1 output and a USB-A 3 output, which both charge with 15 watts, and in this case 5 watts and 3 amps, which would be not the 18 watts of the Quick Charge 3 or 3.1, but at least kind of the older 3, or maybe, let's just say it's the 15 watts in total. So if my phone charges with 15 watts, that would be a little bit less compared to the older Quick Charge, but what I also have to mention here is that Samsung phones, at least the Galaxy S10, which I have, usually don't charge, or at least my phone does not charge with Quick Charge 3, so it doesn't even charge with 18 watts, I think. Even though it often shows it, I can't remember what it charges with. And so this has been an overview over this charger, which is called the Finibo charger, 300 watts, and kind of an unbranded generic charger from Amazon, which seems to be working quite well, and so far it at least has not damaged my notebook battery, even though the last one blew up, and I don't necessarily know exactly why.